Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
We are joined today again by our friend Meg Elison, the Philip K. Dick Award-winning author of The Book of the Unnamed Midwife and The Book of Edda. Hi, Meg.
Hi, nice to be back.
So good to have you. And this is episode 37. We're going to be covering the novella, Faking It Phoebe, from 2017 by the author, Chad.
Alberta J. McMorris is the pen name, and Margaret Petrov is the name of the actual author.
I wonder why she chose to go with a pseudonym and why she chose that one specifically.
Well, I had a brief conversation with her on Instagram, which I didn't know that if I wanted to or not, because I kind of wanted to approach this as just like a found object, because the story is sort of a found object. But she is a fairly prolific self-published author on Amazon and has a kind of a different series of books going under her main name, and this is a different sort of thing. And, you know, I think some people do the pen names for just to not confuse the marketplace.
That's true. A lot of authors do like to put a side project under another name and figure it out. You know, Ian Banks, the famous science fiction writer, had to write as Ian M. Banks when he was writing true crime at the behest of his publisher. It's not really that different, but it's different enough to distinguish him.
That's really silly.
I think publishers worry that people will think they're getting one kind of book and accidentally buy another, but really the difference between Sans Spade on a cover and a bunch of spaceships on a cover is pretty obvious.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get too much further into the publishing world and Faking It Phoebe, want to tell our listeners that our next episode, we're going to be covering the movie Only Lovers Left Alive, the Jim Jarmusch film from 2013. And for this episode, we're going to try something new. We are going to ask you, our listening audience, to send in your questions, things you'd like to hear us address about the upcoming episode about Only Lovers Left Alive. And you can do so by emailing us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org, WHATTHE at scarythoughts.org. Look forward to hearing from you. And I got nothing to plug. Does Meg have anything to plug?
I have an ongoing reading series in the city of San Francisco called Cliterary Salon. We have a show every month. We have one coming up for Pride. It'll be on June 8th. You can find us on Facebook and on Twitter as Cliterary Salon, exactly how you think it's spelled.
Where do you do that? We're
currently at an illegal speakeasy, the location of which I can't reveal unless you buy a ticket. No, I'm not kidding.
Wow. So it's like how raves used to be in the city before. At least you can keep it down at a literary salon.
I do. It's pretty great. And honestly, I didn't know that kind of thing still existed in San Francisco. You know, everybody talks about it as part of a bygone era. So we're very lucky to be there.
Excellent. All right. I know you're going to love this episode, so rate it and review it on iTunes and Stitcher. You should sign up for our newsletter at scarythoughts.org. And any other warnings we want to put out there? Warnings and requests?
Yeah, we'll probably talk about some broad vampire stuff. If you're listening to this show, you've definitely seen the movies that we're probably going to bring up. If not, what the fuck kind of horror fan are you? I don't know what to say.
Non-horror fan.
Non-horror. Yeah. I mean, does anybody really need a content warning? We're going to talk about vampires.
Yeah, and we don't care if you suck or not. Just give us a 5-star rating. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess we kind of started, but... where do we want to start with this?
Well,
let's start with, actually, let me say,
sure.
Last episode, I asked you why we're doing this book, but why don't you talk about again, like how you came across this book, why you thought it would be a good subject for doing an episode about?
For those of us who are real big fans, but did not listen to the last show.
Sure. So we've lately, in private conversation and our Facebook episode, had growing concerns and interest in what does it mean to have your experiences mediated by algorithms. And there's a great New York Times piece a couple weeks ago that I cannot even remember the name of it, so it obviously wasn't that great. But the whole idea was that these algorithms that are choosing what people buy are sort of shaping culture in these really insidious ways, making it very much the same. I mean, I find when I walk onto the Caltrain to go to work, you see people who have purchased the same sort of style outfits from like Taylor and Stitch or whatever. And I bought a bunch of shirts from them. I was like, look at me. Like, I'm saving money, looking good for work, blah, blah, blah. And I get on the train. I was like, that guy has the same shirt on. What is going on? And that would have never happened in the 90s punk rock era because you couldn't get the same shit. You had to make it yourself before whatever came on the scene.
Yeah.
It's not punk rock, but I would argue that in the 90s, like you would see the same thing on people because they were limited in what they could obtain. So you would see like the same outfit from Target on, all the 6-year-old girls that you saw because people didn't have access to the internet and they couldn't get goods from far distant. Like you get people who buy weird stuff on eBay in the 90s, but that was the beginning of it.
For sure.
But I agree that the algorithm is beginning to determine people's taste. And the thing is, the stuff that floats to the top is the stuff you see most often. So everybody reads the same books and sees the same films and buys the same shirts from Everlane. That's absolutely true. But I don't think it's so much a function of the times. I think it's just a function of the pyramid.
Well, convenience too.
Absolutely
it's like so convenience was one of the things, and I basically don't go to bookstores because of convenience, and two, I've had more shitty interactions with people who work at bookstores than probably any other business.
That's awful.
And it's a bummer, man. I'm a dude who comes in to spend. Like I'm ready to like just set money on fire when I go into bookstores. And I got to the point where I'm like, I'm allergic to your shitty cat and you're a dickhead. So
that's particularly bad to hear in a city like San Francisco, which has wonderful independent bookstores.
This has been the worst city for it, with the notable exception of Borderlands.
Borderlands,
always been cool.
Borderlands is the goddamn best, and they have ongoing horror events and science fiction events. I mean, they can make the best recommendations for a genre reader.
Totally.
And I would argue that Booksmith is on that same level, although not necessarily for genre readers. They're one of the best I've ever been to, and they have excellent events.
Yeah, the Booksmith on Haight Street can go suck a fat one because I used to work right by it, and I would go in there all the time, and people were just lame.
Well, I will say about Borderlands, I mean, I used to work at Aquarius Records, and one thing we really prized ourselves in is that when people would come in, we worked there because we're excited about music. We don't have some investment in arcane knowledge. It was about like, I'm excited about music, and if you walk in and are looking for something that I'm not into and we don't have, maybe I can somehow not like hard sell, but like, okay, you're into that. Have you heard this? Like, this is what is really exciting me, but you buy whatever the fuck you want. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm just stoked to talk about music. And I get that feeling from Borderlands that if you go in and you're like, hey, I've been reading some weird fiction and I only know the most obvious stuff. Like, anyone there, their eyes will just like light up, and just like, how much time do you have to talk about weird fiction?
They can't wait to tell you. It's true.
It's great.
And that's the original algorithm. The original algorithm was people who knew their shit saying, if you like this, you will probably like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say though, every once in a while, people at Borderlands can become like the Borg and look through you.
I mean, that's just working. That's just working retail. Retail sucks the life out of you.
So,
I just got off a shift at a bar. I was looking through almost everybody after a certain point.
Yeah, I helped my friends serve ice cream at the Veg Fest yesterday, and I myself never want to see vegans in that number ever again. And not because they're not lovely people, but because they're a crowd and you're serving them, and immediately they're the enemy.
Yeah.
And you can't give authentic pieces of yourself away 8 hours a day, every day. Like you can't. There aren't that many pieces of you.
No.
And retail pays you so little and gives you so little predictable off time that you can't even rebuild those pieces. You never get them back. I worked retail for like 10 years. They don't come back. I'm sorry, folks.
No. The only thing that you can do is steal as much as possible.
That's the thing. You got to suck it out of other people.
Yeah.
Speaking of vampires, you got to get it somewhere.
It's the true communism, stealing from work.
We commune and we share our energy. And take home as many rolls of toilet paper as you can, folks.
So this book popped up as an algorithm. And I thought it was kind of unusual because I am not quite the same aficionado of vampire literature. Like for instance, other than a hardcover or collectible edition of Dracula I bought like 2 years ago, I can't remember the last time I bought a vampire book, even though I've read a fuckload of them. So I'm like, why is this being suggested to me? And then I had this weird conversation earlier today. I was like, remember how much fun it was to go dig through records at a record store? And so I will say, like, record stores are just, I don't know, they're more self-sufficient. Like, you don't really necessarily need to talk to the neckbeard behind the counter to know what's hot. You can just go through the crates, right? Although that dude might have some good info for you. I mean, that's the whole Aquarius model, I guess. You're not a neckbeard.
Was I the neckbeard?
You're not a
Holy
neckbeard.
Yeah, you look pretty clean shaven from here.
Yeah.
No, the thing that I really love about that experience, both in record crates and in like used books and weird books, is that you stumble across things you would have never even known to ask for. Like the experience of finding something to read by accident is incredibly rare these days, especially since you don't go to bookstores. So you had that unusual find moment, and good for you. And I'm glad you brought it to us.
Yeah. And then the other thing was, I was thinking a lot about horror movies and how like a low budget, quote unquote low budget, crappy horror movie can have its own pleasure. And I was thinking about how I've never really experienced that same pleasure in literature. Oh, there are books that are corny and fun or whatever, but like a book that is like very like Phantasm 1-ish in its structure, there's just something about it. You're like, was there no editor involved or something like that? There doesn't seem to be, at least in the great horror genre, and you, Meg, are like a super scholar on this stuff, they're tighter than equivalent pieces of art are in other formats. I think.
No, it's true. Yeah. I think because writing a book requires so much discipline, and the people who decide to do it for the most part have read so many that they can at least mimic the form that you're used to. So you still get that organic, crunchy punk rock experience, but within a framework of people who expect that there are rules to this art form.
Yeah. So that's really the whole. I totally agree, by the way, and that's really the whole reason why I picked this book, and then this novella, and then we read it. And, as per usual, the comments on Amazon weren't totally helpful. People were mostly like, it just didn't feel like it went all the way. And I think that is like a very legit opening critique you could lay on this, is that it definitely feels like a book that you just want to get into. At page 43, you're like, okay, is there more of this?
That's the thing. I started looking at where I was in my progress, and I was like, this can't be. I'm 3/4 of the end of this, and this can't be where we're going because there's so much that's unanswered. So I really think that works like this that intend to set up a longer series should just come with a statement from the author and
just
say
volume 1,
right,
part 1,
even just like the smallest indication. But ideally, I would have loved like 300 words from the author. Like, this is the first novella in a series of what I think is going to be 20 novellas, and keep giving me 99 cents. Like, I'd keep giving her 99 cents. Just tell me where we're going with this, because I expect a contained novella to be a contained work, and this was not. So it felt a little bit set up.
Yeah, and I think, like, having talked to the author via Instagram, which is weird. It's a weird way to interview an author.
Was that the only place you could find her?
That was it. She has a
on
website.
Twitter.
She has a website,
Twitter, okay.
like Making Vampires. We'll follow all this stuff for listeners. Sure. This will all be available for you to look at and read, because my memory is terrible and riddled with holes from the abuse of the devil's cabbage. And I apologize to you, author. But yeah, so I got I think I had the same experience you did. What about you, Mark? Were you just like, hey, is this more to this? Or
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was very confused, but I didn't assume that there was going to be more, that she's working on other parts to it. I was just like, oh, this is really unsatisfying. And then when I reread it, I kind of had some distance and thought like, oh, I think she's got like a lot of these short pieces that are in progress. And so that sort of set me up for like, okay, this is part 1. And that gave it a certain allowance for me.
It reminded me strongly of the Southern Vampire series by Charlaine Harris, because it's vampires existing in a world where there are other types of supernatural creatures, which is not always the case. Because it sets up the possibility of multiple partners for the main character, which is, of course, one of the big features of Sookie Stackhouse books. And also because of that deep history, long bloodline, many old scores to be settled plotline that gets raised almost at the end. So I think that for fans of the Southern Vampire books, it could definitely catch on because it sets it up in very much the same way. It has all these deeply laid threads that you feel like we're not going to get to for 10 more books. And they're in for that. They're totally fans.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned the Sookie Stackhouse books, which, like, I'm always curious if, like, I kind of stepped out of playing like vampire role playing games and when I was 18, but I'm like, man, she owes White Wolf some money.
I feel like a lot of authors who owe White Wolf some money.
Yeah.
The thing is, if you like I did started playing World of Darkness or even D&D games when you were a kid, what they give you, the best thing that they give you is a setup for a story, and it's meant to be a springboard for storytellers, but it ends up being a springboard for people like Seanan McGuire and Charlaine Harris and Laurel K. Hamilton. When Laurel K. Hamilton really owes them some money, but there's lots of us, I think, in that club who started thinking about the way these myths turn into ongoing stories that you can just keep telling over and over.
I wonder what the percentage of genre writers that are your age, my age, played, successful authors played.
I'd say
D&D.
it was quite high.
Like China Mieville, for
Of course.
instance, played.
Yeah.
I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates. My favorite thing about him is he talks about D&D
He's
constantly.
a big time D&D nerd.
Yeah,
No, I think
yeah.
Nick Mamatas played. I think most of us at least had passing contact with a role playing game. I mean, I played Changeling this morning. If we want to just be completely cards on the table,
Changeling of all the ones to play. Weird.
my husband
May as well
really,
play
really
Mummy.
likes it. I hate Mummy. My husband really likes Changeling, so we're playing Changeling. He also has a mage game going on. Like a lot of us didn't stop.
Mage makes sense to me. Changeling, though, I don't know. Red caps are kind of cool.
Red caps are
This
super
is
cool.
super deep nerd. When
This is getting nerdy
I
as
have
fuck.
no idea what's
Mark,
going on right now.
Mark, who
I'm
is
super stoked for you all, but deeply confused.
Mark is a crazy nerd, and he's looking at us as if
And
he
you're not-
was a football
Not a
player.
role playing nerd.
correct.
Never.
Like a year and a half when I was 12. I think this came up on a previous episode.
Was
where
it D&D?
It was D&D and then Top Secret, and then I hit puberty and discovered girls and never, ever
Some
looked
of those
back.
girls were at the role playing game.
Not in my
Oh
town.
God, and the number of men who tells me that is just fucking appalling.
It was pretty rare, man. I mean, I felt like
Not
even-
that I found. Well,
understand.
okay, actually, let me put it this way. I was more interested in hanging out than playing D&D with other 12-year-old girls.
Sure.
That's-
No,
yeah.
I get it. Why would you share a common interest when you could make out real sweaty in the backseat of a car?
Well,
They just
it
weren't
was
that-
also music. I also I discovered like girls who were into like weird music, like I was,
And that's huge. I understand. That's-
and that carried. I mean that runs my life to this day.
That's a deep universal bond that,
Right,
Wizards
right.
of the Coast was never going to touch. So
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The Dungeons and Dragons, I read yesterday that it is having its most successful year ever this year.
you know what it is?
great.
It's fucking
Yeah.
Stranger Things.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Stranger Things got people's kids to ask their dads, like, what is all that? And
Right.
everybody's playing again. It's amazing. And for a long time, people would shit on D&D and be like, oh, it's not as good as World of Darkness. And they're right, first of all. But second of all, it was the inception. It was the beginning. And it deserves a lot of credit for that. Also, it's gotten better in recent editions. I can give that.
I think I mean, we're way off the topic of the novel here, but I feel like talking about White Wolf is legit and talking about this novel. because-
Definitely. No, all these shared
Yeah.
universes that have all these different types of supernatural creatures existing in, a universe of murder mysteries or a universe of colliding worlds that have to be kept in order so that everybody can live. Like
Right.
all of these stories that Michelle Baker's Borderlands, for example, where you have the Fae who are also cops who know these people who are, like Unseelie She. All of that I feel like was inspired by, or at least heavily influenced by, World of Darkness.
I mean, even today, like my outlook on culture broadly it's influenced by role playing games.
And role playing games in turn influenced video games. Like we
Yeah.
would never have had Portal if we didn't have a generation of engineers who grew up playing solve the puzzle, do the quest games. Like that's what that is.
Yeah,
Yeah, we just do it in photons now instead of atoms.
yeah. It's still more fun face to face. I mean, I'm playing like a
I
tabletop
agree.
game. It's just fun. I love that.
I crave human interaction, though. I know lots of people don't.
Yeah. Well, like Brian Posehn, the comedian, he's a heavy metal guy. He had a D&D podcast for a long time called Nerd Poker. And that's really what it is. It's an excuse to get together with a few of your friends face to face, share some analog time. And then I feel like there's almost a bit approaching like what a bit of the ritualistic involved, because you have 5 people holding an idea in their head kind of at the same time interacting with it. And
It is absolutely a ritual.
Yeah.
In every way.
Yeah.
You set up a boundary, you set up expectations, you have shared work that you do. I mean, it meets, I think, every condition of being a ritual.
Yeah, which is hilarious because all those Jack Chick comics were right. Right?
It's actually devil worship.
It actually is. Yay!
God, Jack Chick. I used to have such a collection of those.
Yeah. There was a great book from the Church of the Subgenius called High Weirdness by Mail, and one of the things it advocated in it was to drain the resources of those people by writing to them and requesting material from them. And so
That's actually why they stopped distributing the Watchtower on the basis that they did. They realized that people were requesting it to drain their resources. So it used to be you could subscribe and they would send it to your house, and then the Jehovah's Witnesses got wise and they stopped doing that.
That was also a J.G. Ballard thing where he would recommend, like, you should just subscribe to every weird-ass catalog.
Every Moonbat mailing list, and then you
Yeah.
can use it to start your pilots, or you can use it to start your stove.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, especially it was really popular to do that shit in the 90s too, because if you were
Do you
like
remember
a
black faxing?
No, it's a...
I never did it, but I remember it.
Yeah, so black faxing is when you fax somebody a completely black piece of paper and you run out their fucking toner.
dick move.
Of
It's
course.
yeah, you have to send him like 100 pages of straight black. It's a real dick move. It's great.
I wonder if you could do the same thing with like a stock photo, because like by now computers are so smart to spot the black image.
Yeah.
But if you sent somebody like an 8.5 by 11 of ladies laughing at salad,
And with like bright colors and just run it out. I mean, you probably could. And half the people who have their printer on their local network don't have good security or any security. So, I mean, I'm not encouraging this behavior and it's probably not legal, but I think it is technically possible.
man, like there's no security on printers. Like the company I work for, we don't have printers anymore because they're unsecured.
There's those assholes who airdrop their dick to people on in the airport because you can just airdrop on anybody who's got their Mac unprotected enough. Like, clearly this is possible. Yeah. I mean, if you need a lot of women to look at your dick, you're obviously very important.
Well, speaking of the 90s, something that this book and its existence and the way it's operating reminded me of zine culture that rose in the 90s is just the idea of self-publishing. And obviously, self-publishing has been like since the printing press, there's been self-publishing. But the sort of like DIY ethos, just like putting stuff out there,
just get it out there.
networking, and cutting out mediary businesses, it feels like very similar.
Super 90s. I agree. Yeah. This is in effect like a one-person zine, which is what all self-publishing is.
Yeah. And I feel like, would we maybe say that fanfic is sort of like zine, then fanfic, then this kind of explosion of what platforms, honestly, like Amazon and others, are making happen.
I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm so glad you're here to answer this.
So I think, like, if you think of the whole thing as a tree, right? So you have zine culture and self-publishing as it has always existed as like the main trunk of the tree. Then a straight upward big part of it would be the outgrowth into like Kindle Worlds and KDP and the immediate platform change for self-publishers to put stuff into your hands, like straight up. And then fanfic would be like a slightly sideways branch that makes like a 90-degree left turn into something else, because fanfic has to be demonetized, like of necessity. So it's always going to be a little bit weirder and a little bit less protected and a little bit sideways to all that. Even though the first fanfic mailing lists were in effect zines because you had to get them physically in the mail in a nondescript brown envelope. But even so, like, it's always going to be a stepchild.
And think about like the little fanfic that could 50 Shades of Grey.
That's the one.
You know, like that shit.
Do we have to talk about that?
I mean, I think
if we're talking about fanfic, it bears discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally interesting. You go in and just remove some vampirism.
She filed the serial numbers off of Twilight fanfic, and she made $1 billion out of it. And as much as I can say about that book, and believe me, it's a lot, you cannot argue with success.
Yeah, you can't.
She can give us both.
Can't?
I mean, you can, but in the
hate
end,
the player, you have to hate the game.
that's
Mark.
the thing. In the end, she wins. In the end, she can give us all the finger on the way into the bank. It doesn't have to be good.
Enjoy your bank. I don't know.
See,
Aleister Crowley says success is your proof.
I agree.
Is that what? No.
James has success.
Yeah.
And frankly, James wrote porn for an audience that wanted porn and wasn't being served porn. That in itself is a type of genius.
Find a hole and fill it. That's what I always say.
That's it.
Ew, those just converged really, unfortunately.
Okay, so let's talk about the book or the novella a little bit. Speaking of filling holes, there's the vampire holes is what I was thinking of.
There's barely any sex in this, though.
Well, so that was one of your complaints, and we were talking about bringing back, starting an age of all anal vampires in response to the sexlessness of vampires. And I think in an expanded novel, this setting, this 1960s setting, like late 60s, Max's Kansas City, New York, has a ton of potential.
So much, because it's happening at the same time as the sexual revolution. And it's about like a woman's ownership of herself. And like we talk about being a vampire as an analog for being on the pill. Like, I'm young forever and I'm not going to get pregnant and everybody wants me. There's so much you could do with that.
And also it makes me think of the art world, especially Warhol, which I think is never full front in this book, but really I think should be. Like, if this were to be redone into something else, I think just dragging it right into borderline historical novel.
Sure. I
would
mean,
be-
she could involve a lot of those type
Yeah.
of personalities. There were parts of it, especially in the relationship between Phoebe and the photographer, that reminded me strongly of Patti Smith's relationship with Robert Mapplethorpe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's so tortured. He's so brilliant. He always thinks like an artist. He's clearly not meant to live for as long as I'm going to live. Like, there is that beat down Brooklyn feel to the art scene in this book. And again, so much you could do with it.
I went to art school with an artist who actually was part of the factory for a little while.
Really?
When Warhol was alive, and he was never very forthcoming about that. And so, just one time
I mean,
at a
I
bar, I was just like, "So, what was that like?" And he just got really vacant, and he was like, "They were vampires. They ate me alive, and I can't believe I'm still here."
That's
like he was, and
amazing.
he just regretted it with every part of his body. What's reminding me of that is that like they were vampires.
That's the thing, is when you get into a scene of people like Warhol where everyone's very beautiful and very strange and you don't see them in the daytime and they're always skulking around these giant warehouses and literally sacrificing the people in their lives to their
Yeah.
art. It's a hop, skip, and a jump to vampirism.
Totally.
Right.
Like, she put these vampires in the right scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was really clever. Not clever, but it was kind of a
It was a
cool
good move.
thing. And
Also, kind of a fresh move.
yeah, exactly. That's
I
what
haven't
I'm
seen
saying.
anybody else do that.
Yeah,
Give me Warhol the Vampire. I will read a 10-book series on Warhol the Vampire.
Yeah.
One other thing that it did that I thought was unique, that maybe you guys can think of another example, but usually vampires are the consumers, whether it's Lestat or Countess Bathory, they are the ones who do the consuming. But in this book,
Phoebe is the one that's consumed.
she is the one she's consumed by her photographer boyfriend. She's consumed by the public when she is in the public eye. She's consumed by the two her
Edgar and Barrick.
Yes.
And yes.
So she's actually the one who is under the thumb. And I think that was really interesting. It's a fucking bummer.
It is, but it's an interesting reversal.
Yeah.
I agree. There's actually, I give new books very little leeway, frankly, because I have to get a lot of reading done and I have to get a lot of writing done, and my time is not what it used to be. So I give a new book about a page, and I can tell whether I'm going to go on or not. I know
It's
that
like the
sounds
Oprah
brutal.
rule.
It is.
Yeah.
It's basically the Oprah rule, but honestly, it works. And the thing about this book was I was going to read it for the podcast no matter what, but I did want to record whether it got an honest buy-in from me or not. And this book got an honest buy-in from me, because in the very first page, she says, being a beautiful woman means that you meet men and they assume something in you belongs to them. And it opens up that question of consumption, like you said, immediately. And it also gave me something to relate to, because, I mean, I'm not the prettiest person in the world, but seriously, if you're attractive at all, the men in your life have some hook in you and they think some piece of you belongs to them. Yeah.
One of the things too that is almost like stock for Phoebe, well, maybe not stock for Phoebe, but for vampires, is becoming a vampire is not a meritocracy.
No.
Sometimes you can simply just be attractive enough
Right.
and nothing else.
Yeah.
Like that's like basically Louis in Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah, I saw you and you were beautiful.
Yeah,
And that was it.
I mean, of course, he had the house and stuff like that, and all the slaves to eat, but
He
ultimately,
wanted to possess Louis. I mean,
Right.
the movie, for those of you who haven't read the book, the movie really sublimates the homoeroticism in the relationship between Lestat and Louis. But in the book, it's pronounced.
Yeah.
He wanted to possess him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're right. I don't think it's ever a meritocracy. I can't remember ever reading a vampire novel where a sire agonizes over whether you're a good person or even whether they're going to be able to stand your ass for the next several hundred years.
Right.
It's seriously like, my fangs are out, my dick is hard, you're the one.
Yep.
Well, there's also the What We Do in the Shadows, which is just like he's cool to have around.
He's cool. It's fine.
I mean, and he's also sort of the coolest person that they've met probably in years.
Yeah.
And even though he's a nerd, that movie is still, I still think it might be the best vampire movie ever made.
It's in the top 3 for sure. It is so good.
I mean, also, like, bringing it back to 90s role-playing games, if you ever played Vampire as a live-action role-playing game,
That's basically it.
That movie is that experience. I mean, it's so good. You take that movie and then the South Park episode of Vampires versus Goths,
Yeah.
and you have 1995 New Orleans.
You really do.
Like, you really have it.
I feel really sorry for all those baby goths who like turned 18 and like, I'm gonna move to New Orleans where Anne Rice lives, and they ended up like working in bars.
Well, see, so
Sorry, not that working in a bar is a
Not-
terrible
no,
thing, but it's
no.
not as romantic as people make it sound.
Well, I
totally.
have some personal autobiographical information on this whole scene that you've
Oh,
imagined.
yes, please.
there was a bit of a split between people who came there to be vampires and people who lived there and were into like goth and industrial music. Because at the time, Trent Reznor was there. Like it was kind of a big deal.
No, it was a real scene.
Nothing Records was there,
Yeah.
and there were several goth bars. And the thing that was so weird about it was like all the vampire people, their main job was they would come to live in the French Quarter and read tarot cards in the Jackson Square, and it was really fucking sad. But it was so bizarre to see it act, because these people created this self-delusion. Like they would actually like sort of treat each other. It was almost like a Ren fair in a way, like "Good evening, my lord," that sort of thing. To people who had just been, it was just so amazing.
Kids who picked vampire names who would not be addressed by their slave names anymore.
Oh yes, I'm Azaroth.
I only answer to Alucard.
Yeah.
No, I remember those kids, but it was super pathetic because I was in and around LA at that time. And, we had all discovered Susie and the Banshees and thought we were hot shit. And we lived in the middle of nowhere, and it was 110 degrees all the time. It's not fun to wear all black. No one wants a tarot reading, and it doesn't even have the romance of being someplace like New Orleans. It's fucking LA, which is a place with no romance, no heart, and no brains.
As depicted in The Neon Demon.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, there also totally made me remember this. The character Scotty also sort of reminded me a little bit of the first photographer in Neon Demon and the last one put together, and that like he runs into this person first, so he's kind of the first person to photograph her in that way.
Scotty's kind of a stock character. Like, first of all, let me be very clear and say that I am a working writer, and I try not to say shitty things about other working writers, but I had a number of issues with this book. So, dear author, if you're listening to this, I apologize. I'm going to say some, let's say, constructive things. So, Scotty is a stock character. You see that exact kind of tortured, abused, too brilliant for his own good photographer in a lot of books. I would have liked to have seen a dimension to him that was slightly different than that stock character. But you're absolutely right. You see him in Neon Demon. You see him in any number of things. But the man behind the camera is always, frankly, a vampire.
While we're being hopefully constructively critical,
yes.
I would say I have a similar feeling to the time period that like the mention of music was like John Coltrane, Miles Davis, and the Beatles. It's a very Life magazine issue.
You get better
depiction
action
of this of 1969 or whatever year this takes place.
You get better action out of an episode of Mad Men, and that's not saying much.
Right. I'm someone who really believes in research, and nothing helps the depth of setting in literature like good research or having lived it. But if you haven't lived it, do some research.
Yeah.
And it feels like there wasn't too much to tie me to that time other than very sort of like the things that everybody knows about 1969.
Right. It's obviously the 1960s.
There weren't any deep cuts.
I mean, even just one pull from the B Team would have been great, but she only chose A Team references.
Right.
The other thing that I thought was really missing as far as establishing setting is I wanted to hear more of what people were wearing. I know that people, back me up here. If you're playing a vampire game, you think a lot about your costuming. We all want to hear about the velvet bullshit and the lace cuffs.
Sure.
Right. So I want to know what vampires in the 60s were wearing. I want to know if she was very mod, very go-go. Like the early scenes where she's vacating her hotel room, she says she has designer dresses and she says she has good shoes. And for the love of God, tell me what they're like.
Yeah.
Tell me what she's wearing. Tell me what Edgar wears. Tell me what anybody wears. Because that gives you so much of the 60s.
Yeah. Or even like for some character development, like, which pair of shoes did you grab?
Exactly.
You could grab one pair of shoes. Which ones did you grab? Even if you don't say why, the choice to grab the completely impractical Vivienne Westwood's.
Right.
So, totally. So this makes me want to play a little game of this is a pseudonym. What's the gender of the writer?
Male. No,
that's no. No. This is a fruitless game in a certain sense, but it's hard not to wonder, okay, like someone's working under a pseudonym. There were certain things in the text that raised questions for me about the gender of the author.
So, for example, not describing fashion would, I think, be a typical pratfall for a male author.
Right.
However, driving a would-be rapist out of the house by getting old and gross.
Right. No, totally.
But that's a trick out of the toolkit of a female writer.
Right. And honestly, what the thing you said that happens right up front, which is like men think they own a part of you. Like, that's not something that men don't have access to.
No.
But that's pretty upfront if you're living in a woman's body.
The way she describes it and the fact that it comes right up front, I had no doubt. I actually paged back and I was like, yeah, this is written by a woman. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm pretty split because I felt like I was getting things like omissions and inclusions that kind of triggered me in both directions. I don't know.
I think they were very good.
This could also be a team of 12 people of 12 different genders. So I don't fucking know.
I doubt it. Although I have issues with the text, I think it's really cohesive. You can tell it's a single writer with a single voice. So I wouldn't believe it was a team. There are things that function very well about setting. I think describing her as someone who's lived in New York City for 40 years, and she hasn't left since 1928, really changes her intimacy with the city and explains why she loves it and how she loves it. And then immediately taking her out of it and reminding her what the stars look like outside of Manhattan, like even in the 60s, that was an astonishing thing. And then moving her to someplace like Saratoga, which is so well known as a getaway spot, and making sure that it's woodsy and extremely quiet and extremely different. I think that's used very well.
Yeah. Well, she, in conversation I had with her briefly, we talked about sort of almost like where other good settings for vampire stories like this. And I thought like late 70s, 1978, CBGB's New York punk rock scene would be a great, like if you were to move this story up a little bit, like do like an It with it, like move it.
Or even just continue in the series.
Totally.
Yeah. Put her back in the city, let her go to CBGB's, let her have a different look, make her look like Joan Jett and get back in the scene.
The old scene is dead, long live the new scene, you know, kind of thing.
Anywhere there are junkies, it's actually very close to a potential vampire
feeding ground.
Thank you. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. But the reason why I bring it up is she mentioned that she had grown up in New York around that time, but wasn't kind of part of the scene or anything like that. She was just a New Yorker. So I think that probably explains why Rochester is so well described. And it almost could have brought in a little bit of like weird New England-y, like that's obviously not New England, but like weird.
It's almost
you're escaping
like once you head upstate, it starts to be New England-y.
You're getting into get out territory once you leave a big city like that.
True.
You know,
the people whose white flight carried them into various suburbs. Yeah,
or they just landed there.
Yeah, also that
years ago and built their
because
homes
this is where the train stops.
Yeah,
yeah.
My feet hurt. I'm done. We'll make a life.
How the West was won.
I liked the aging thing for vampires. I think is probably the most unique thing in this book. Like I was trying to rack my brain if that has appeared anywhere or if it was like similar to something else.
Like deliberately aging to pull something off.
It's the ultimate, honey, I have a headache for vampires. You know what I mean? You're just.
It also allows her to pass unnoticed. Like frankly, old people and especially older women are invisible. So it's one thing to slide out of a very, very well-known countenance and say, "Oh, I'm not that girl in the magazine," but you're not only not that girl, you're nobody, and that would be a super useful thing. And I agree. I don't think I've ever seen it in any other vampire story. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it would have been fun. I mean, I guess you don't have to know where something comes from, but like, why? Like, how is it? I mean, I've been reading a lot of science books lately, so I guess I'm kind of like, oh, what is the mechanism that this works under? That's not this book.
There were a few pieces of the prose that made it sound as though what she looks like normally is some kind of glamour or some kind of function of the ongoing consumption of blood. So what she looks like is how old she should be. So it's almost a restoration of truth, which isn't science, it's magic. But I did find that interesting and I desperately wanted more of it. There were a lot of moments in this book where I just wanted her to tell me more. Like, how does this work? How does it make you old? What's in the potion? Where does it come from? Are there witches in this world? Is there a druggist who's securing this or creating it for you? Like, do you have somebody making you your monthly anti-werewolf potion like in Harry Potter? Like, give me more of that. And then whatever creature it is that Edgar drags to the house whose blood is an aphrodisiac.
That smells like absinthe.
It smells like absinthe
or something. Yeah.
What the fuck is she?
I was going to ask her.
She says she's not human, but she never does say what she is. And I want to
never
know.
Walked out. Yeah.
Right, but what creature's blood is an aphrodisiac? I need to know for reasons.
I mean, if I were to guess, if it were to like track with Sookie Stackhouse,
you can go succubus.
I'm gonna say it's a fairy, maybe.
Fairy, yeah. Fairy blood is supposed to be aphrodisiac or gets you high or whatever. But also, I think succubus is a good.
According to.
Oh, in the Sookie Stackhouse books and especially in the TV show, fairy blood gets vampires kind of high and kind of randy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, it allows them to daywalk only a little bit.
It's such a cheat.
Yeah.
Like for me, I like the idea that a vampire just bursts into unbelievably painful death. When
That's
the
my
sun
preference
comes
too.
up.
I want the Buffy vampire who, if
Yeah.
they touch sunlight, just goes straight up.
Yeah.
I didn't love the idea that she fell asleep in the sun, not thinking about it, and kind of burned her arm. And they're like, but you haven't had fresh blood. Like, you're right. It's a cheat. I don't appreciate daywalking vampires.
So the Cullen thing, just like, no.
No. No.
That shit is just
The worst.
Even in Gary Oldman's Dracula, I mean, it's so like, and by the way, vampires can walk around during the day. I mean, it's one of the most shocking moments in that movie because
Right.
it's kind of the first time I'd ever seen it, and then
It's not really well explained there either. No. I think the most important thing to a magical creature story, but especially vampires, is that you have to establish what their limits are. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you have your typical OP problem. Like, there's nothing that a human can do. They need to be vulnerable to several things, and they need to have limitations. Otherwise, they're just gods. And you have the Superman problem, and it gets boring.
Right. I hate approaching work with shoulds. Like, I've encountered this a lot in school, and when people bring me their work, there's a thing of like, when you give criticism, that it's one thing to think about what works and what doesn't work. It's another thing to sort of be prescriptive.
Absolutely.
Of like, you should have done this.
Right.
That's fucking bullshit. However, with this one,
We're about to hear a should.
kind of, only sort of. If this had more detail, this could have been a complete novel.
Absolutely.
And the way I think that could have been, and this is where I don't want to be prescriptive, but it's kind of coming off that way. If she established if she was living with this ghost for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and there was an established relationship, and she took this ghost to her grave and said goodbye, that's a story.
It is.
As opposed to like, who are you? Oh, I can kind of see you. And then a few pages later, she's just gone, and the vampire keeps going. It's like, but if there were like 40 pages of a relationship developing, and she sees her through to her grave with her to be at rest with her family, that's a story. That's done.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, okay, great novella.
So here I'm going to be extremely prescriptive. As long as we've got this door open, I'm going to charge right through it. This is 3 books. They don't have to be novel length, but this is at least 3 novellas. So 1, the photo is a problem. We get into the issue of what vampires look like and why it's so difficult for them to pass unnoticed, and she's blown up her life. I would like to know more about that life. I would like to know what we lost. And you could use Edgar as the antagonist in that first book. Like, he obviously wants to control her. He obviously has an ongoing problem with women. He wants to sequester her and turn her into some kind of concubine using fairy jack-off blood or whatever. That's 1 book. Second book, she's still in Edgar's house for whatever, and she meets Nora. And the big reveal that Nora is, spoiler alert, Edgar's first wife, that's a big deal. And she should be able to confront Edgar about it and ask him questions about his past and how many have there been. And maybe he killed her. I kind of got like a Crimson Peak vibe.
something, yeah.
Right? That's a whole story. And like you said, taking her to her grave and seeing her to her peace is a fantastic gift. That's book 2. And then book 3 could be this barrack thing, which gets into like her bloodline and the existence of ongoing vampire families and what it means to be who she is through all the people that she's come from, which is like a second time being born. And then him taking control of her and her wresting control back and like figuring out who she is, and let's say going back to New York, and her former partner who is Celia/Sage, and that's a whole other thing. Like, if the author goes to the trouble of saying the character preferred this name, the narration should forever after refer to them by that name. Anyhow, so that whole thing, like returning to New York, returning to old friends, figuring out who she is, and taking herself back from the literal patriarchy of the progenitor of her vampire line, that's a big 3rd book. Like, that's a finisher on a trilogy. There's a whole book here. There's a whole series of books here, and we only got the barest sketch of it.
Yeah, well, hopefully, if Margaret listens to this and likes not likes our suggestions or whatever, but I think it's viable.
It
is,
is.
and there's so many like really. There's more original vampire shit in this book than some legit big vampire books I've read in the last few years.
I totally agree.
You know?
She has so much to work with here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think she has another Sookie Stackhouse to work
Yeah.
with here. And again, dear
Yeah.
author, I am sorry, but these can't be things that she doesn't already know. Like, every author knows there are galaxies within galaxies, even in a short story. And I really hope that she's considering developing this.
Well, I do think that, to be fair, fair to us, not the author. God. This is actually an interesting thing about self-published, and this is the same thing with music. It's like when there's no mediator, you eliminate a large set of problems, but you take on a large set of problems, and usually those problems are unknowns.
That's the thing. Yeah.
There's plenty of terrible art out there that has been mediated.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are terrible movies that have, so many hands in the pot. But if it's just you and a typewriter, there are so many questions that are not put to you.
Right.
And so these are things that get overlooked. And it actually takes, I think, a real special skill to be able to answer all those questions completely alone. And, there's always community. There's always outreach. There's always, can you look at my draft and give me input?
Writers have writing groups. They have beta readers. Like we have communities of support. Absolutely.
Right. But often self-publishing means that you're probably not even going through that.
Right.
It's often a very personal act, I feel.
It
not
is.
always, but often.
Yeah.
And that's, like speaking about music, at least with music, you're a band, and at minimum, there's 3 to 4 of you, and that's very different from like you're just alone hacking away at your word processor.
It is a deeply solitary work, and it's an act of extreme courage and vulnerability to publish something that only you have seen, that only you have had your hand on, to know that ultimately all of the responsibility resides with you. I've never self-published, although, I've put stuff up on my blog, and even that can be mortifying when you realize you've made a mistake, or that even just knowing that you could have done better, and you always look back knowing that you could have done better. So I don't want to take a single thing away from self-published authors. It is a damn difficult job. That being said, though, as you pointed out, it's not that you get a better set of problems than traditionally published authors. You just get a different set of problems. Yeah. So you get to keep all of your money. You get to keep all of your control. You get to be the final arbiter of these decisions. But you give up marketing and promotion and cover design and an editor, and you give up so much. So I can see both sides of it quite easily.
It's interesting, though, like people are figuring all that stuff out, though. Like there's an ecosystem that it's sort of coming together to take the place of all that other stuff, and it's happening slowly. Like the cover of this book has like a blonde girl on it, and it came from an Instagram photographer that she met online.
Okay.
So it's like it has a little bit of like a punk rock feel to
that
it.
DIY feel, yeah.
Yeah. But then some people it's interesting. Some people just don't quite put it together. Like there's this guy, all the stuff's out there, but it's kind of a pain in the ass to figure it all out for self-publishing, because it's asking you to, 1, be a great writer, and 2, now you are a project manager because you have to get an editor, you have to figure all this shit out, and then boom, guess what? You're a creative director now when you're getting your cover made, and now you have a budget. Oh, who did you hire? Somebody on Fiverr? Your book's not going to sell, buddy, and all this stuff. And I had spent like quite a bit of time researching all this shit, and I listened to this guy Greg Walsh. He owns a gym in Rochester, New York called Wolf Brigade, and and he was on another author's podcast, and they were talking about like how shitty publishing can be for certain people.
Absolutely, yes.
Because this guy Greg's book, it takes place in the 90s. There's like kind of a serial killer element. It involves kids in high schools, and actually, I don't know that it takes place in the 90s. I think that's just what I wanted it to be. It's actually not. It doesn't take place in the 90s. I think that was one of the things I was going to tell him was like, oh, this would be totally rad in the 90s. But yeah. I think that about everything now. But he was on this podcast. He's like, oh, if anybody knows anything about self-publishing, I'd love to hear more. And so I was like, I'm going to write this dude a letter. And so I sent him an email, and the subject line was "fuck publishers in the face." And I gave him my whole document. Dude, put a book out, Theft of the Age, and it's solid. It's totally solid.
Awesome.
Yeah, it looks great. The cover's awesome because he's an artist.
Sure.
So is the moral of the story, listen to what Chad says?
No, the moral of the story is just fucking do it.
Yeah,
and know that but the thing that was so great about Greg was he's a graphic designer. He's had his own like hardcore punk rock distribution label and stuff like that. So he knew the importance of aesthetics. And I think if I were to offer any advice to an author in this field is if you don't know what the fuck is up, find one of your friends that does.
That's it. You have to find somebody who does.
Yeah.
And that goes all the way. Like people think of aesthetics just mean the cover, having a good layout, having a competent layout artist to make a book look like a book.
Yep.
I've been on the jury of a couple of different awards, and many of them accept self-published entries. And the difference between a book that was laid out by somebody who knows what they're doing and somebody who actively wants to destroy your retinas is immediately obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, not knowing the aesthetic is a huge, huge part of it. So yeah, if you have any design background, or if you can just find somebody who does, does, it makes a big difference.
Yeah. And I mean, this is kind of a weird one, but like if you're out there right now listening to this and all you need is a cover for your book, I know like both of us, me and Mark, we both know a ton of cool art people that could help you out, and they all need money.
They
you
do.
know, like, I mean, I have for my militia, I got my logo made by a friend of mine and paid him legit money, and it looks fucking great.
Yeah, and there are people in your life who need legit money. I wasn't a self-published author, but the book of the Unnamed Midwife was originally published by an indie publisher in LA called Sybaritic Press. And they're really small, and it's basically run by these two women, and it was micropress in every way. So my original contract said that I had the right to attempt to design my own cover, and that they had the right to refuse it, and that if I fought them on it, they would probably just pull the contract, which I'm sure is a problem for many new authors. So I decided to take a swing at it, and the only way that I knew how was one of my roommates at the time was a professional photographer. So we mocked up that cover in miniature and lit it and shot it, and I got to be the AD on that and decide what it was going to look like and what it would feature. And that is almost the experience of a self-publisher, but I immediately involved somebody who had visual skills because I have none. He also laid out the title for me, picked the font, like laid out my name as the author on the front. I mean, he did a lot of work. And at the time, I didn't have much money, but I did legitimately pay him. And then when the book was republished, I gave him a big chunk of money just for having done it. And,
It's worth it.
Retroactive battle pay. But it's totally worth it.
Yeah. I'm curious about, one of the things they never teach you in any school is like, okay, you finished your book. What do you do with it? I mean, like, for real. Like, okay, you say you've written something that's solid. You got 190 pages of something that will sell. I mean, what do you even do?
Yeah, this is shitty news for any aspiring authors out there. But the next thing you do is you pitch agents. The agent pitching process was the most demoralizing, self-hating, frustrating, awful part of my career thus far. And I would do anything not to have to do it again. Like, I feel like I should give my agent more money than she already makes, because I never want to have to search again, because it's awful. It's like sending out poorly lit Polaroid nudes of yourself and asking people for their honest feedback. And for the most part, they don't even say the shitty things that that you ought to hear. They just say nothing. So I went through nearly a year of pitching agents and not hearing a goddamn thing back, not even a no. There was one agent that I really wanted, and this is so funny. He emailed me like a month after the book won the Philip K. Dick Award. And he was like, this is interesting, but the writing's just not there. And it took every ounce of willpower,
Fuck
dude.
you.
Yeah, it took every ounce of willpower not to write him back and be like, actually, motherfucker. And I didn't, because publishing is a small world. So that's what you do. And that's why a lot of people fall out of the funnel and end up publishing on their own, because it's goddamn horrifying. And if you don't find an agent, you can pitch directly to publishing houses that accept unagented manuscripts, but you are the slushiest of the slush, and you're only getting read by an intern or somebody's nephew. And it's the same problem. You're shouting into the mouth of a cave. You get a form of rejection back if you're lucky.
Yeah.
It seems to me, at least knowing how music works, and it seems that this is across the board, whether you're in visual art or cinema or publishing. So there's actually a little problem in the question as you posed it. Like, okay, I've written this book, now what do I do? That people who have success in most fields, in any field, not even arts, well, they usually have a community that has been helping them along the way and share these. So the idea that I'm going to just like write a book and then see what happens next, as opposed to I am a writer, I socialize with other writers, we share, I contribute, we collaborate on, not collaborate, but exchange ideas, help each other with what publishers give advice, edit, these sorts of things. It's the same in music. Like, you have a music community. So it's not like I finished this album that took me 10 years to write. Where do I send it? It's like, no, dude, you got to go play shows.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
It's totally true.
You got to send your demo tape to your friends who are also musicians and have constructive criticism. But that's, I think, generally, like, you live as the artist. The advice is be part of a community, not just pragmatically, but because, like, how do you be an artist alone in your bed? That sounds like narcissistic in a weird way,
and useless, frankly. You're absolutely right, and I definitely skipped a step. Like, you're building those connections all along. If this is the business you intend to get into, yes, you spend time with other people who are writers. You send short stories out to magazines and to presses online, and you get feedback, and you join workshops if you can afford them, or you join critique groups if you can't. And one of those people might do you a solid and say, hey, my agent's looking for new clients, or like, I know somebody who just started at Barry Goldblatt, or whatever. Like, it's honestly, it's the worst thing ever, but it is who you know. And that unfortunately contributes to the pipeline of publishing being super racist and still really sexist. And yeah, and that's a whole other issue. But the fact that community is the biggest pusher in that means that those of us who have those communities need to look really hard at who's joining us and who's not. And if we want to open up some doors for other people, then we have to do that aggressively, starting at the very beginning.
I remember my friend Robert Crouch, who's an artist and a curator from LA. He came up and gave a lecture at San Francisco Art Institute, where he and I both went together.
Awesome.
So he was like lecturing to younger us's, and part of his lecture was, he said, my advice to you all, honestly, is, he said something to the effect of, look at the people sitting next to you right now. The most important thing you're going to get from this school is not what happens in class. It's the people sitting next to you, the relationships you have, and that you will continue to have with people who will like keep you from like self-destruction and remind you why you're doing this, and they're going to help you through. And yeah, have shows together.
Yeah.
Like, be there for each other. That's what you're mostly going to get from art school is genuinely community.
It is. It's funny because people will see it about other people. They'll say, oh yeah, you go to Harvard for the connections, or you join a frat for the networking, and bitch, do those things in your own school. Like,
and it's funny, like, you know, a lot of people think of, I think Michelle T writes about this, about like writing actually being a social practice.
It is.
But even if we think about, you know, again, I come back to music because it's so at hand, but also such a cultural force that like a lot of the music that we know happened around like Gilman Street, like people going to the same fucking club every weekend. Like, you know, we were talking earlier about Warhol and like Max's. Warhol and Mapplethorpe and Patti Smith, and, you know, they all went to the same goddamn club, restaurant, bar.
Right.
You know?
And they took the time to say something about each other's work, good, bad, and different. Like, I saw you play that show, I saw your piece, or I think you could have done this better, or I think you're a fucking sellout. Like, have those conversations. Yeah, absolutely worth
like,
it.
I fucking hate you and I will crush your work and make better work. You know, like that.
Competition can be
huge.
super useful.
Yeah. I have a monthly group that meets to discuss albums. Like, we all listen to the same album and then talk about it. It's like a book club, but cooler.
Fun. Yeah. It's such a great idea.
It's such a good idea. I recommend.
You guys should do a show. That would be a great podcast.
That'd be super fun, and most of them are also comedians. So
Well, then never mind. We don't want any more comedians doing podcasts.
No, but the cool thing about it is that we talked about that kind of motivation. We were talking about. I picked the album Pet Sounds. So we were really digging into Pet Sounds, and we were talking about all the other artists who listened to that, and they were like, man, fuck you. Like, how dare you throw this huge concept album out there and pretend that it's pop music? And yeah, even that is incredibly motivating. Even if you don't hang out with people you like, hang out with people you fucking hate and remind yourself you can do better. Yeah, it is absolutely a work of community, even for self-published writer.
The other thing that's interesting about the work of community, like you, Meg, and many writers are fans of Stephen King's On Writing, right? Yeah. And he, in there somewhere, he makes a point like how your crew is all the people that you read too.
Yeah.
And like I think that you know, like that's one of the things that's interesting about authors is that you're not just the people around you. Like, you are all the weird, creepy shit that, or maybe not creepy, but I mean,
sometimes,
speaking myself, creepy shit that you've read, and it becomes a thing, and it makes
does.
And then I wonder if that accounts for people like Cormac McCarthy, for instance. He's not sitting around with his friends like discussing albums, although that's not totally true because he's at the Santa Fe Institute, and that whole thing is about getting weird people together to talk about stuff.
He's, I think, very selective about his work and community, but and his work reflects a certain amount of isolation. But absolutely, that.
Yeah.
The other thing is that they are the people that you read, which influences your own work. And also, when somebody asks you, like, say on a podcast, you know, who are you reading these days? You think of people in your crew. Those names immediately come to mind. And I mean, that's how those recommendations work out. That's how somebody says, I need a reader for this show. And you're like, I know somebody who does that. Or they say, I want a book that does this. And I say, oh, Nick Mamatas writes that. Nobody writes that. You need to read this guy. Like, those names will immediately come to mind. And you're always selling your friends' books. You're always doing each other's work. I cannot recommend that enough.
So I'm curious, and we can edit this out if it can only be in territory that you're just don't want to go on record talking about. But is it a dance with the devil with having a publisher? Like, what do you genuinely get from it? Obviously, prestige, like money, like whether it's like actual like good money in your pocket or money to promote it and like get the word out there. What do you feel is some very concrete life differences between self-publishing, and you get 100% of the money, but you do the 100% of the work, versus having a publisher do that lifting for you?
So I've never been a self-published author. I do have to say that I lack that exact experience. I can tell you that starting off in the world as an independent published author, it's almost the same thing. You do most of your own marketing, you do most of your own promoting, you have to hoof to bookstores and ask them if they'll host your book, even though they've never heard of your publisher and you're not available through a major distributor. And that is uphill, and it's a lot of like feeling like a door-to-door salesman. Like everybody just shuts it in your face, and it's not great. Mm-hmm. So I have something like that experience. So having had both, having been at an indie house and a major publishing house, it's night and day. What I get from my relationship with a publisher is definitely what most of my socialist friends would describe as an exploitative relationship. Like they make like 80% of the money back. However, I make 100% of the money that I do now because of what they've been able to do for me. So I have a professionally designed cover, I have a professional layout, I have a SAG-AFTRA actress who did the audiobook for my work. I have incredible prestige. I have bookstore placement, which is almost impossible to get as a self-published author, which means no one will ever discover your book by accident. I have major distribution through Baker and Taylor and Ingram, both of whom supply books to libraries. People who sell books for a living often overlook how many books a library can sell. And also, library readers are reviewers. By and large, they'll put everything they think on Goodreads, on Amazon. They'll review the same book in multiple places, and they will move copies. So being with a major distributor is a huge, huge boon. Frankly, I make money because Amazon pushes my book, because it shows up in those algorithms, because they recommend it to people who liked The Handmaid's Tale, which is, I mean, I couldn't fake that if I tried.
Badass, Meg.
Super badass. Yeah, fantastic stuff. And frankly, I live with 5 men and I make more money than any of them as a working author. And it's incredible that I get to say that, but I only get to say that because I have a major publisher. So it literally pays my rent. So that 80% that they're taking is money that I frankly would not be making anywhere else. And that's in chunks as advances. And that's also on, my publisher happens to pay monthly royalties, which is a huge, huge advantage in my case. Most writers only get quarterly royalties, which really sucks. I have no idea. I mean, I don't suck that bad at budgeting, but it's really hard not to blow all the money when it comes in. So monthly royalties go a long way. They also, some publishers can get you into programs and opportunities that you wouldn't have been able to reach on your own, because people don't contact the author, they contact the publisher. So like if somebody wants to say option your movie, your book for a movie or for an ongoing series projects, self-publishers almost never get that. They won't start with you. They'll look for the name of your agent, and then they'll go to your publisher and find out what your contract terms are. It can get you into anthologies, into excerpts, into best of. It also opens up academic gigs for me, because they will very rarely hire self-published authors to come talk to a class of would-be writers, of MFAs or people like them.
And women's studies
Yeah.
groups on campus have money that a bunch
Need
of
to give
19-year-olds don't know what to do with. And if you come along and go like, hey...
I've actually been a guest of a number of gender studies
Great.
programs, and also LGBT studies programs or LGBT centers, because a big publisher will do things like categorize your book for you. So say you write about superheroes, or say you write about queers, or say you write about people who designed bridges in the 17th century. A self-publisher might not know or may not have the tools to get their books indexed on that basis, but a big publisher does. So I have an excellent relationship with my current publisher, and I hope that I continue to do so, but they've done nothing but great things for me.
And what's the transition from being on an indie publisher to going big like that? Like, is it like AAA baseball to the big leagues? I mean, like, how does the small publisher hand you off? Like, I just think, like, again, with the music, being the closest analog, it's like you're on Discord. You're not going to be on Geffen.
No, it's true.
It's interesting.
How it happened for me is pretty atypical. It's unusual, but my publisher, like many small publishers who are not out to suck the life out of you, have what's called a reversion of rights clause in your contract. So at some point when they've done whatever work they intended to do, say one print run or a period of time, you get the rights to your work back. Copyright should always revert to the author. I mean, that's how a lot of people in the music industry have lost their souls.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the good thing about the publishing industry is that copyright almost always resides with the author, which means you have the ultimate responsibility and the ultimate ownership of your work. So my first contract had a reversion of rights clause after 18 months. So when that came up, at that point I had hired an agent, and I had somewhat better prospects because I had won the Philip K. Dick Award, and I lucked out with my debut, and that made all the difference in the world. So my new agent looked at my old contract, and she's like, you're about to get this book back? And I was like, yeah, I know. And she's like, I think I could sell the audio rights. And I was like, I would love to have an audiobook. And that was as good as I hoped it would get. She came back to, she signed me under a limited basis. She's like, I have the right to represent your audio rights, period. She came back like 2 days later, and this was back when I was at my day job. And she's like, listen, are you at work? And I was like, yes. And she's like, I need to fax you something. So she faxed
you something that says, leave work now, don't look back.
Yeah, so she faxed me like a broad representation of rights contract. And she's like, I need to represent all of your shit right now. I think I have a deal. So I got to sell my debut novel twice.
Fuck, that's awesome.
It was so awesome. It's like being born twice.
I'm so happy for you. It's so rad.
I literally have my dream life. Like, this is what I always wanted to do since I was like 10 years old.
What a kick-ass thing to hear.
It is so awesome. So yeah, so I got to sell the same book twice, to an indie publisher and to a major publisher. So I feel like I have an unusual but pretty interesting experience.
Great. So you've got this publisher, all these things are set up. How is this working in terms of what you are working on next?
So in terms of next, I was not under contract, but I did have an understanding with my current publisher that I would finish the third book in the same series as Midwife and Etta. So I have done that. The third book in the series is going to be called The Book of Flora. It went in about almost a month ago. I'm expecting edits back and to move forward and hopefully see it out by the end of this year or early next year. I'm really excited about it. But it did kind of change things because the publisher that I'm with is specifically an imprint just for science fiction. So when I thought about my next project, I was wondering, do I write another science fiction book and stay with 47 North, or do I really want to branch out into horror, which is what I've always wanted to write? I actually get a lot of email from fans of mostly horror who read Midwife because people told them it was gritty and scary. And they're like, oh yeah, you could totally write horror. And I'm like, I already know that. But I'm super excited to move into horror, and that opens up some vistas for me because the imprint that I'm with doesn't publish horror. So we'll see where that ends up.
Just throw in an AI thing and it'll be sci-fi horror.
And now it's sci-fi. She had a really good cell phone and also an implant in her head. Yeah. I'm really excited to move into horror. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I can't wait.
Great.
Yeah, and it's written, it's done. So I'm shopping it immediately.
Oh, you have your horror book written?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Damn.
I published my finished word count on Facebook the other day, and I was like, it's a thing. It's a thing.
Congrats.
You can decline to answer, but what manner of ghoul is the creature? I mean, not that it necessarily has a creature, but does it attach to any particular genre, or have you found new territory?
It's not specifically new territory. It is definitely in horror thriller territory. It has no supernatural elements. It's definitely like the true monster was man all along kind of story.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in supernatural horror, and I believe I have a project that I just started that's going to go that way, but I'm not there yet.
Cool.
That's exciting. What do you think is the most successful vampire novel that you've read?
Like successful in terms of establishing a mythology, or
like in the way that like my favorite book is Blood Meridian. I think it's the most successful Western ever.
Oh, it's so good.
Like if you were to say
this is the takes the cake vampire book.
Yeah.
Man, that's hard. It's really tough to beat Interview with a Vampire.
It's great. I don't know why people started shitting on it. It's great. I mean, people, I guess Tom Cruise came in there and
he did his Tom Cruise thing. Yeah. I think, frankly, the rest of Anne Rice's career has caused us to look back on Interview with a Vampire with a more critical eye than we would have otherwise. Like if Anne Rice had, I'm not wishing her any ill or anything, but if she had published Interview and then died, it would have been looked on as a work of genius for centuries to come. But because we have to look at it in the context of the rest of the books in that series, which aren't frankly that great, and some of her lesser known works like Cry to Heaven or Queen of the Damned, and then her work on Jesus and her subsequent return to Catholicism and her weird meltdowns about gays, like all of this wears, unfortunately, on what is a true masterpiece of the vampire genre. And it's shitty to wish that somebody would write one great thing and then disappear, but it's such a good book, and I hate to think that it's always going to be viewed in the damaged context of the ongoing relationship with the author.
It's interesting how Mary Carr's Catholicism didn't ruin her. Like I just got her new poetry book, and it's still great. She's still got it, you know. And then,
but does Catholicism, in some interpretation, undermine sort of like the very thing that you want about Mary Carr, the way it would with Anne Rice, where there's a sort of like deviancy at its core that is the thrill of a vampire novel?
I think you can
make good vampire novel.
I think you can make peace with your Catholicism in a way that stays pretty sexy and frankly very pagan, which is what I always thought that she was on that voodoo vibe. You know, I thought she was heavily syncretic, like still Christian, but taking what is Christianity and pushing its taboos, right?
That's Mary Carr's.
Right. Mary Carr is great at that. Or even like Poppy Z. Bright had a way of...
She was standing in front... still she at the time.
I know it's complicated.
It's very complicated.
Yeah.
But standing in front of a church that was closing down in New Orleans as a new Catholic who was just fucking stoked on Vatican I. I mean, it was the weirdest goddamn thing I'd ever seen. And then, 2 years later, Mr. Z Bright, I guess.
No, he changed his name. I can't remember what the name is.
I cannot remember. It's Chris.
Chris something.
Yeah.
No, but that like S&M relationship with the church is really productive for a lot of writers, especially in horror.
Robert Mapplethorpe.
Exactly, Mapplethorpe, because they take what tortures them about it and they turn it into great art. And I don't think that that's the problem for Anne Rice. I think the problem with Anne Rice is the vacillation between I'm here for the sexy voodoo and I feel real bad about my choices. Here's a book about Jesus.
Well, all good goth music, at least from the 80s, was fueled by like a really fucked up Catholic upbringing.
Exactly. Like how many Typo Neg songs just sort of tangent into saying weird things from the Bible in a very sexual tone. Like I'm not going to pretend I didn't get off to that.
What a handsome man.
Oh God, one of the best looking men of all time.
Really?
Yes. You know he's the basis for Neil Gaiman's Dream character?
Really?
Yeah. No. The physical basis is what's his name?
Peter Steele.
Peter Steele is Dream. He's Morpheus. Oh my God. I barely maintained a solid state looking at him. Like I turned into a liquid.
I liked his first band, Carnivore, that hardcore band, I really loved quite a bit. Some of the lyrics are not really digestible for the modern ear, I think. They're sort of opinionated.
I mean,
in that
Typo Neg lyrics aren't always either.
No.
Yeah.
I remember we had... when he posed for Playgirl. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Sure.
And I remember my friend was like, had my girlfriend at the time who was like the only cute goth girl that played D&D. Like in like
we're gonna leave that statement alone.
No, where we were at, you have what you,
okay,
you know,
in your immediate
in my
area.
immediate area. She was
Thank
like
you.
she was like the only girl that we could play with. And then we started going to sci-fi conventions, and then there were more of them, and then we discovered goth clubs, and they're like, oh my God, there's a whole thing. But I remember him making her
Excuse me. So fuck D&D. There's a whole club
of hot goth girls.
Yeah.
A lot of them went home and played D&D. But anyway, this has been my drum all day. No, somebody started this fight with me this morning in my Changeling game, so I'm ready to burst into flames at any moment.
Well,
I'm backing down.
I definitely don't want to rile you up too much, but what was your position on that? Like that there were more girls in that time, or there weren't? I'm just curious. I'm not trying to like.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
First of all, the problem of creating the specter of the fake geek girl is highly offensive. Let's just start there. Mm-hmm. Here's the second thing. There were a lot of us in those times, like even back to the late 80s, who wanted to play D&D, who were really into Star Wars, who were really into sci-fi, who wanted to be goths, you know? And we would show up to these things, and first of all, you were always the only girl. Mm-hmm. And second of all, the guys were either creepy or shitty or some combination of both.
Oh, definitely in my experience.
We kind of got squeezed out. It's not that we weren't reading the books. It's not that we weren't watching the films. It's not that we weren't listening to the albums. We were just told over and over that we didn't belong. And then the audacity of the dudes in these spaces to say the jocks are mean to me and my parents don't like me because we're having the same fucking experience. Mm-hmm. And then we come to what we think will be our like-minded fellows in their weird black t-shirts, and they're going to do it to us too.
See, I totally agree with you there. I think that what I was going to say, I was curious if you were like, oh, they were there. They were just...
I'm not saying they just weren't in your area. I'm saying we were there until we were told not to be.
But now, I think, first of all, if you like playing D&D, the fucking idiocy of pushing away any women or, whatever you're into. Maybe you're gay, right?
Right. Anybody who might be interested.
You might want to rub up against,
Right.
Like, what the fuck? Why wouldn't you be like, you like D&D? Oh my God, roll these dice and sit on my face. I mean, it's like you would want to have, now kids, it's so much. I mean, obviously it's not, there's not parity, right? There's
but it's much better when we're frankly living in the age of the geek. I mean, just Marvel just shits money down a mountain of gold. And that was not the case when I was a kid buying X-Men at the corner store.
Yeah.
So living in the age of the geek makes that a lot better.
Yeah. I just don't get it. Like people, okay. So the fake geek girl thing.
Yeah.
I do not fucking get it. Who cares if she's fake? I mean, even though let's give the men going their own way dork their point for a second and say that she's not real, she doesn't really love that thing. So the fuck what? She's down.
Right.
For a thing
if she's pretending to like something to get your attention, she's obviously really interested.
And let's get
Which
real.
is, by the way, not a thing that happens
She
because somebody wants your attention that bad.
She doesn't want your attention. She
No.
doesn't want your fucking dork attention at all.
No.
No, she still wants fucking Aquaman.
Right.
You know, you're not doing it for
No, she wants fucking Jason Momoa. Who doesn't?
Right.
No, so the other thing is that
we all want Jason Momoa.
everybody wants fucking Jason
ridiculous.
Momoa. Every time you post a workout video on Instagram, I have to lie down for a while. No, okay, so I think it comes down to control. Like, you want somebody who wants to roll dice with you and sit on your face, but suddenly you don't control the sphere anymore, and there's somebody who you perceive has power over you, because men perceive attraction as power, because fuck me, why? Yeah, so I think a lot of boys especially felt threatened by somebody coming into their sphere who they could not control, who they could not wholly own, and the way that they could, squash their friends under their big DM thumb. And in that's just rooted in old school misogyny and the stuff that these boys were raised in from the cradle, which is to say entitlement. And we're seeing the outpouring of that in incels going their own way with guns.
Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
with dorks.
That's the thing is I can't stay anything like calm about this, because it's literally turning into people calmly having policy decisions about enacting The Handmaid's Tale and dudes shooting their ex-girlfriends in high school, and us not connecting violence against women to that problem, to us not seeing the fact that most of these dudes offend first with like domestic violence before they shoot up a club in Miami. Like, it's the same fucking problem. And feminists have been saying it for decades, and people are like, no, you're just paranoid. Like, that neckbeard isn't everybody. Guess what? We're way off the topic. I'm so sorry.
I think it's all fair because, you're talking about genre stuff. You know,
Yeah,
we're talking
no,
about
this
the
is-
genre that we like and we care about. You know,
This is genre world.
but it's so much better now. Like,
And
for
it
genre
has
stuff.
improved so much.
It's the idea that there would be like a YouTube show about porn stars playing D&D.
Isn't that
To me,
cool?
when I was 13, and then it's D&D with pornstars.blogspot.
Yeah,
is
no,
what
I'm
talking
familiar.
about. I'm sure you would be familiar with it. Just in case people who are listening aren't. And the guy's named Zach. Zach Sabbath is his porn name. His art is great.
Yeah.
And his writing on D&D is great.
Totally.
He has really interesting ideas. His module that he sold. So speaking of self-publishing, you can write and make a grip off of a D&D module on Kickstarter. Like, they're all 100% funded.
You're going to want to be really careful about your copyright use, but yes, you can.
Yeah.
And people have been turning like DMing into revenue for a long time. I mean, Dan Harmon's not the first guy to sit everybody down with a microphone and be like, we're going to play a game now. Like, yeah, there is a revenue model there. Also, I think there's a really interesting, oh man, this is way weird, but I think there's a really interesting crossover between people who do sex work and people who do role playing. Because for most sex workers, there is an element of role play. You have to become the thing that your client wants you to become, whether you're doing like cam girl work or like phone sex back in the day, or real in-person, in the flesh sex work. Imagine you sharpened your teeth as like a half-elf warrior, and now all you have to be is like a cheerleader.
I mean, the role playing thing is so important. Popcorn and Piston Vinegar guys, one of our brethren podcasts, Chris Tyree told me a story about one of his buddies is like an operator overseas, like a waterboarding people type of dude.
Oh.
And his presence, he said, the guy who does it says, comes from having played live action vampire, like to be able to be, I am whatever, and to be able to present it in a believable, fun way. He says all of his ability to talk to terrorists that they've captured or whatever the story was,
Because he had a character.
because he had a character,
He's
and he
being a
understands how to
character.
play that character.
That's
It's super
astonishing.
interesting.
I wouldn't think of it as operant conditioning, but it is. It absolutely is.
Yeah.
I mean, people tell me all the time that it helped develop their theater skills, that it's easier to take on a character because, they think about their dots. And I guess that works very much the same way.
So you said Interview with a Vampire for your favorite.
Yeah, so what's yours? Either of you.
Oh,
I have to confess, I've probably seen every vampire movie made before like 1990 or something like
Okay,
that.
yes.
But I've probably read like 4 vampire novels.
I mean, you
so
can
I
pick from-
can't contribute.
You can pick from movies also. Like, what's the best vampire
Yeah, it could
movie?
be
Oh,
successful.
but that list for me is really long.
Is it
like,
huge? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, I love Valerie and her Week of Wonders. I love Daughters of Darkness.
That's fair.
Yeah. I think I've said this on previous episode where it's my favorite vampire movie is Jess Franco's vampire movies. Like, we'll just take them as one
That's
smear of
It's an oeuvre. It's
you
fair.
know, like none of them stand on their own at all. But as a group, like Jean Rollins films, just all of them as a film are great.
Sure.
You know,
I have a really soft spot for vampire movies that are also funny, because I feel like that's very underexplored. Like What We Do in the Shadows is a great example, but I had a hard on for Once Bitten for ages.
really?
Yeah, Once Bitten's amazing. Are you kidding me? It has a dance battle.
I also love Girl Walks Home Alone at Night.
Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is a pioneering work of
Yeah.
vampire fiction, and yeah, you guys should do an episode on that.
I agree.
Yeah. So
but some of us hated it.
Hating it means you have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
So, what's your favorite?
Yeah.
Man, as far if I were to go books, I have a real deep love for Poppy Z. Bright's Lost Souls.
Oh God, so good. I came really close to saying that too.
And it's definitely a deep cut for a lot of people. But I read it, and the Interview with the Vampire was super huge in mid-90s, especially New Orleans, because they were filming it there. So you would walk around the French Quarter as a young goth and be like, there's dirt all over the ground because they're filming Lestat here. They would try to make the city look really old. And so that's all going on. And then...
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt really quick. Poppy Z. Bright's name is now Billy Martin. I'm not trying to dead name an author or deprive them of the correct pronouns. We're talking about the work of Billy Martin. Go on.
But, okay, so the segue to that, still writing as Poppy Z. Bright. So do you say it's interesting, right?
It is. I prefer to always refer to people by the name they tell me is their name and by the pronouns they tell me are their pronouns.
Right.
But if you continue to use your dead name or a former name because it's the only way you make money, then that's maybe a coerced choice and not the one the author would prefer us to make.
Was Poppy like a given name?
I actually don't know.
Yeah,
I live in San Francisco. You don't ask anybody if that's their given name. you just take them at their word when they say their name is Cloud. It's fine.
Yeah. The only reason why I would think of it is like, okay, say Poppy Z. Bright was an author that had been imagined and brought into the world.
Right. So maybe Billy Martin is still writing as Poppy because they're still inhabiting Poppy's mindset, which is still totally a thing. Like being a character, like we talked about.
Although Chris isn't currently writing any Billy Martin. Who's Chris? Or
I don't know.
The partner maybe?
Maybe. No, you're right. And I'm not trying to dodge any responsibility by saying that it's complicated because it is, because we're talking about multiple pseudonyms and someone who's been through a great deal of transition. But just to be very clear, I wanted to make sure I had their correct name.
I mean, to me, like I'll call somebody what they want to be called. Totally
Absolutely.
Respect that, of course. I'm just curious with characters. I'm just literally, I honestly just want to know, like, if your pen name, if it's a pen name, I think Poppy might be the real name. Or not real name, but birth name.
Yeah.
Like, is that still female? Or does it change along with you? Or,
right.
But then again, getting into the book itself, the subject matter of the book blows it all out of the water. And you're like, the person who wrote this, clearly something else is going on. Because it's such an extreme book.
That's one of the things I love about this author's work is that they always have a really complicated relationship to sex and gender, which is something, if anybody reads my books, they know, like, it's one of my favorite pet subjects. And there's so much to explore within the subject of vampirism because it's such a highly sexualized supernatural thing.
Yeah. I mean, on top of that, too, it's like Poppy Z. Bright, not content to just do some like gender stuff. Here's a big old dose of incest in here with this stuff. I mean, it's so crazy. Yeah. And like the thing though that it does that's very interesting is it is to a human experience grotesque, but it creates such a weirdness for the vampires in that story that it's not even a thing that they blink at.
Right.
That is interesting.
Yeah, it is. No, I
agree.
It
makes them seem a little bit more like predators, in my opinion. Like, because in the way like a wolf might fuck its daughter to make another child.
Right, which is totally acceptable in most types of animals and like is common for producing certain bloodlines, and then you make the change to humanity, and it's a very fraught subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've never read that, but I'll have to get it for you.
Yeah, please.
I'm very hesitant to reread it, though, because it's been about 15 years since I've read it.
God, I hate doing that to books that I loved, because if it doesn't hold up, it's just like watching somebody you love die.
I know. I own the hardcover of it. And
nice.
I think I've always avoided her work because it was often compared to Kathy Koja, and I read some Kathy Koja, and it was like maybe one of the worst things I've ever read.
I would agree that it's better. I would agree that they have similarities, but Bright's is better. Yeah.
One of the things that Bright's books are great for is like not all great, but it's a pathway to other cool stuff. Mm-hmm. Like I know about William Burroughs because of Poppy Z. Bright.
Yeah, their references are on point. And like we were talking about before, it's not always A Team. I looked this up in Time Life magazine references. Sometimes it's weird shit.
That's great.
And it's so, so good.
Yeah, it's full of just odd shit. And then also the New Orleans that was portrayed in Lost Souls is a great New Orleans. It's very cool. It's very well done, and it's very
that's kind of the New Orleans that you knew, right? Like it's. I mean, you're qualified to judge that.
It was definitely the New Orleans that I wanted there to be. And then if you were looking for it with acid, you would find it.
You look for anything with acid, you'll find it.
But one of the cool things about that book at that time was Poppy Z. Bright would go to goth clubs, and you'd be like, "Oh my God, will you please sign my totally fucked up paperback?"
Yeah, that I'm carrying in my back pocket.
Yeah, that has been. And then
I would have lost my mind. I would have laid down palm branches for them to walk on. Like,
I mean, just a really pleasant, friendly person. You
So
know, like you have
cool.
like, you know, when you're some dork, and where Poppy would often hang out was this bar called The Convent, which was a goth speakeasy in the French
Yes.
Quarter. It was also like an S&M thing. It was, and you like they wouldn't let just anybody in there. It was a really weird, fun thing. And the guy who owned it was deeply into the occult and had just a crazy collection of old Thelemic books. I mean, it was a weird place to go. And then he homeschooled his anti-vax children who are now probably retarded with some sort of disease.
yikes.
You know? Yeah, New Orleans is weird, man. It was a weird place to grow up in.
The closest thing I have to that is hanging out at Bar Sinister in LA in like the early 2000s when I was finally old enough to drink. And yeah, everybody trying really hard to look like a vampire and everybody posing as some kind of occultist and everybody reading Bobby Z. Bright and Anne Rice and some of the old classics. You know what really sucks? Dracula sucks.
The book, it's boring.
The book is really boring.
No.
Are we going to fight about this?
No.
Okay.
I'm just going to quietly disagree.
No, please.
I've read it 3 times. That one I have read like 3 times, and I love it. But to be fair, I haven't branched out. But it's not like I haven't read fiction.
No, it's
in its entirety, like at all. But I actually there's so much in that book that I love. I can't defend a lot of like how well it's written and how much wasted potential it has as a book. I kind of throw that to a sort of like historical moment that I don't have access to.
No, it's the moment it was created in. It's Bram Stoker was, stuck in his time like everybody else.
Yeah.
There's this thing about the progenitor of almost every major school of horror is itself not a good book. This is something I should write about. So like
Frankenstein is incredible.
Oh, I fucking hate Frankenstein.
Yeah, that's where we disagree. I
shit.
love it.
God,
Yeah.
there's so much that I hate about that book.
Yeah.
We owe Mary Shelley a huge debt, and I will fight a motherfucker to the ground if they want to tell me that science fiction wasn't begun by, a teenage girl. But everything interesting in fucking Frankenstein happens in another room that the reader cannot see that we will not be part of.
Right.
That just smacks of cowardice.
She was a teenage girl. What do you want?
She was a teenage girl.
In the 1800s.
Just out of curiosity, what other books are you thinking of in that
I'm
list?
thinking about Dracula.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about Frankenstein, and then I'm trying to think of like what's the progenitor of the zombie novel.
Man, it's hard to even say that zombie novel was a thing
Because
before
movies
zombie
were really
movies.
a thing. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
Night of the Living Dead. Was
Night of the Living
sort
Dead
of
is
what
the first text, and it's Night of the Living Dead is
I really like it.
it's God, it's so impossible not to like. Like it started so many things. It is good. It is good.
It's also, it has a very unusually strong for its time political message.
Oh, I know what it is. I realized Lovecraft. I love Lovecraft. I've read everything he ever wrote, including his correspondence, and I've been deeply enmeshed in the Cthulhu Mythos. So like I keep thinking I'll write something in the Lovecraft fanfic vein like everybody else does. But he is also a coward, and he's consistently dodging the most important parts of the story by saying, "It defied description. I could not possibly tell you. It would drive you mad if I even described the colors." Because he doesn't have a fucking idea what to say. Like, maybe this is just like a high Victorian problem of we're not going to discuss the actualities of what's going on. And modern horror is more likely to be hardcore, like upfront in the details. We're all accustomed to torture porn. Like, we've all seen much worse than they have to perform in order to give us something. But I've actually read a couple of recent horror novels that have the exact same problem. And I wonder if it's not because we're descended from cowards. All of our great heroes are writers who let everything important happen in another place.
However, I think that with Lovecraft, you're talking about something that's, and I'm not disagreeing with how you're getting to that, but it's also often what is interesting about Lovecraft, that he creates this entire world of things that cannot be described. Like the cannot is sort of at the core of
It's very important.
yeah. And we cover a lot of films and talk about this often, like there are no good Lovecraft movies. That's not entirely true, but there are no good Lovecraft movies because
really
you
hard to
cannot
film.
depict the thing that cannot be described.
In film and in books, I think there is an incredible quality, and it takes a talented creator to do it, where your mind does the work.
Yeah.
Give us just enough to imagine what there could be, and no movie, no book could ever measure up to it. Your brain can terrify you in ways you cannot ever get your hands around. When Lovecraft is good in his best stories, that is exactly what he does. It's like he gives you a beautiful Baroque frame that when you get closer to it, you realize it's not vines, it's tentacles. And then the painting in the middle is like mostly black, but the longer you stare at it, there's like smears of purple and like smears of green, and you just stand there long enough until sensory deprivation drives you insane. That's the experience when Lovecraft is good. When Lovecraft is bad, it's just a frame. There's a bare wall behind it, and he is telling you the emperor has clothes.
Sure. Yeah.
I prefer his limericks personally.
The ones that don't use the N-word are great.
Oh, God damn it. Well, we didn't talk about Nazis, but we did.
You see, you said it.
We
Once
did-
you say it,
Yeah.
the Ark of
Well.
the Covenant is open.
Yeah. Nazi vampires, man.
Nazi zombies. That's a good movie.
Oh, Dead Snow?
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a brief thread on True Blood where there is Nazi vampires. And I gotta say, if you're one of those people who's like really into Hugo Boss and really into vampires, and it's fucking Skarsgård, like, come on, you're gonna find yourself with a conflicted boner.
Also, the one guy in What We Do in Shadows,
Shadows.
also a Nazi.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's true.
I love how well it's handled. I don't even say how almost hilariously badly handled it is.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
It was tough being a vampire. Imagine how tough it was being a vampire Nazi during those times. It's like it's just like a minor inconvenience for him.
Amazing.
It's so
good.
goddamn good. I resisted watching it for the longest time because I thought it was going to think that it was smarter than it was. I mean, this is dumb. I was prejudging something. And then somebody whose opinion I really trust was like, no, really, you have to watch it. And I was cackling, laughing to
I
myself.
can't wait for the show.
Me neither.
I can't
all
wait
I've ever
for it.
wanted was more. All I've ever wanted was the Werewolves Not Swearwolves spinoff. Like,
Yep.
come on.
It's still supposed to be made. It hasn't been shelved, but
I understand it's in trouble.
yeah. But that dude just made a fucking bazillion dollars for Marvel, so he's
Yeah.
probably going to be able to do what he
Should
wants.
be
for a
able to
minute.
do. Yeah.
I mean, that's why we
he's
have.
also a genius.
That's why we have another phenomenal vampire movie. What's the Tarantino one? I'm totally forgetting the name of it.
From Dusk Till Dawn.
Dust Till
Dust Till
Dawn?
Dawn.
That's not vampires.
Hell yeah, it's vampires.
Yeah.
Isn't Dust Till Dawn about zombies?
Oh, it's vampires. They're zombie. I mean, they're not. Okay, so they're not exactly high class, drink your blood out of champagne glass.
No, I guess they're like
vampires.
gross Nosferatu vampires. You know, it's
Yeah.
funny because I have vivid memories of what's her name, the woman who dances with the snake,
Selma Hayek.
Salma Hayek. I have vivid memories of Salma Hayek.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the rest of the movie sort of fades in memory.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought of it as a zombie
I
film.
mean, that movie is actually one of the things that made me really love Tarantino. Was he makes, Pulp Fiction, which is revered, and they're like, "What do you want to do now, buddy?"
He's like, my campy vampire
I'm going to
movie.
make a vampire movie with my buddy in Austin, Texas. Fucking great move.
It is.
You know.
Yeah, no, it's really good. I love Dusk Till Dawn. I do.
So where do we go from here on Faking It Phoebe?
Yeah, we should probably say something in summation about the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think for our listeners, would I recommend this? Just follow along with the show, have some fun, try something out, support an indie person.
Definitely.
It's $2 on Kindle, go grab it.
Yeah, it's
you
a
know?
really
Yeah.
good deal on Kindle, and it has some truly lovely moments.
Yeah, I'd be interested to maybe even explore some of the other, longer books, because there's a book that has like one of the supernatural characters is in it, I guess, and
Cool.
and she also does some hard-boiled detective type stuff.
Interesting.
Which is kind of interesting. I just got Warren Ellis's book Crooked Little Vein, which I didn't even know existed until like a couple days ago.
Yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah, I can't wait to see if it is great or terrible, as many of his things are.
I don't know. I mean, there are so many worse ways to waste $2, so I wouldn't not recommend this book. But I would really like to see more from the author. So I would recommend any listener who finds this story compelling, if they don't want to read this because it isn't complete, to find something else by this author and to read that, because they clearly have ideas and things to say, and that's always exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised. It was, in some ways, it's a self-published novella. It has all those warts from that sort of thing, but I've grabbed some punk albums out of the weird bin at Amoeba that I thought were great and had some good songs on it, and that's kind of where I would place this.
Definitely.
That's fair.
What about you?
Same. I think that because it exists in the world that it does, it might be more suited to people who are dedicated to vampire fiction a little more. I think it's a little bit for people who are already into the genre.
For sure.
Than some outsider who's just like, I like horror movies. It might not. It
Might be
might.
harder.
It might lose you pretty quickly.
Yeah,
but-
you need to be kind of a genre aficionado, like a vampire genre aficionado, because then, like, if you're really into jazz, like sometimes like the pleasure isn't that they've made a fun song that's good to listen to. It's like, oh, they're riffing off of some weird thing that some dude did like 20 years before.
Totally.
And so that riffage is the pleasure.
It is.
Yep.
And in this, like, I think her vampire mythos riffage is the pleasure of
I
this
agree.
book.
I think if you've like cleaned out Anne Rice, if you read all of Charlene Harris, if you read all of Laurel K. Hamilton, and you just really want a hit of something new and different but still familiar, you're the ideal reader for this.
I mean, this fucking blows doors on Twilight. I'll go say that.
Oh,
okay,
fuck Twilight.
absolutely.
Come on.
Yeah,
that is
No,
100%
absolutely.
true.
Yeah, if you have a handful of dollars and you're thinking Twilight or Faking It Phoebe, you're buying Faking It Phoebe. Like,
And there's
Yeah.
more. Then there's more sex in Faking It, Phoebe. So
no
so
kidding.
there.
and Stephanie Meyer does not need any more money. She's fine. Trust
That's
me.
for true.
And if
Yeah.
she would like to support a podcast, we are completely prepared to change this podcast theme from horror to anything that she would like us to talk
Sure.
about.
I'll do a Twilight podcast that's all positive if she wants to throw money. Okay, so anyway, let's fade to black and roll the credits, shall we? Starting with, thanks, Meg. So good to have you. And both Chad and I are serious fans of the Book of the Unnamed Midwife. So amazing.
That's very kind of you.
I was going
Thank
to
you very
bring
much.
both of them and have you sign them, but I didn't know if that would be a little weird.
Oh no, not at all. I sign books all the time. It's
Okay,
great. But
okay.
no, it was really great to be back, and thank you guys for inviting me. And I love talking horror with people who really dig into it and think about it, and that's you guys.
Cheers.
All
Thanks.
right.
And we'll be talking at you all again soon, in a couple of weeks, to discuss Only Lovers Left Alive,
It's Mark's favorite movie.
possibly.
It's really good.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Bye.
Later.
The Book of the
Hey,
Unnamed... Fucker! Bastard.